thank you guys for coming this afternoon to our Lunch and Learn series here at Graham Historical Museum. My name is Brian Fawcett. I'm the Director of the Recreation and Parks Department here in Graham. Delighted to have my friend Brian Baker to discuss the Haw River Trail and whatever else he may get into. Just so there's a seat up here.
It'll be a long 45 minutes.
We don't have to listen to you for 45. If you guys get tired of listening and would like a drink, please help yourselves. I can be
Why they gotta be tired of listening to get thirsty?
just distract. If you need a distraction, then you can have a drink. And I'll be glad to get you something. I can also hold that unless you can.
No,
do that. Okay. And please feel free to walk around the museum after we're done. There's a few things upstairs with the Graham Sports Hall of Fame. So thank you, Baker, for being here.
I haven't been upstairs in a while. I'm coming. Oh, thank you guys. Really appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you. So I'm Brian Baker. I am Assistant County Manager for the county, which is relatively new. I started here in 2006 as the Haw River Trail Coordinator. Stayed with the Parks Department, became Director of the County Parks Department for a lot of years, and have moved up here now. So any opportunity to talk about history or the river or anything parks related, I'm down for. If you want to talk about taxes or your property valuation, we can do that too. I'm not going to be nearly as excited about those topics, but I'm fully versed. So whatever comes up, we've been talking about county budgets for months.
100 years.
And I'm all done with that. So let's talk about something fun.
Yeah, you got there. That was good.
Whatever. They beat you down till you don't care anymore. I got there last week. I'm like, whatever. I do not care anymore. Just do something. So, but no, this is exciting. So I have a whole hour-long PowerPoint I can do about the Haw River and the Haw River Trail. And then this is the first time I've done this talk without that PowerPoint. So this might be all over the place, and you guys are just gonna have to live with that, but we'll just talk. If you got questions at any point, please, let's do those. So mostly what I wanna talk about is the Haw River, something that I worked on for a very long time, and as a natural resource, it's amazing, and that's the part that draws most people to it at this point. But the part about the river and the Haw River Trail project that's always been very interesting for me is the history and how the river has impacted Alamance County, how Alamance County has impacted the river. And that's a really unique aspect about our river and about our river trail. Having the trail by the river is not a particularly unique thing. A lot of towns in our state and our region have that. But having a trail that can tell the story of the place that you live while you walk it is a really unique feature. And the Haw River Trail does that because the history of Alamance County is on the river. It's the history of the river. That's how it started. So it's a little bit hard to imagine as we go through our day-to-day lives now, imagining how impactful the river was 200 years ago. You can literally live here for a period of years and never even know the river's here or pay attention to it. Which is a luxury that we have, but certainly in the early stages of our county, that was not the case. So I literally just pulled this map off my wall, but I'm going to use it to talk a little bit about some high spots. But the first real European settlers were coming down Alamance County in the middle of the 1700s, and they all started moving to the river. The first mill in the county was Armstrong's Mill in downtown Haw River, which is right there. So the driving force of commerce at that time was the Indian trading path, which came here along Stinking Quarter Creek, diverged right there in Great Alamance Creek, and there was one crossing right here at Swepsonville and one here in downtown Haw River. And they both ended up in Hillsboro. They just crossed to different places because the river was the hardest place to get across. Like that was the one big barrier on that path. So you had to kind of take your chances on which crossing you were going to use. So that was the place where you had the water power that the river provided, and you had a steady flow of people on the trading path. So that was the natural commerce points. So that's where we grew. It was really hard to cross the river anywhere else in the middle of the 18th century. one crossing up here that is where Shallow Ford Natural Park, natural area is, because it was a shallow ford. And the Shallow Ford community has been there for a very long time before we named the park that. The park is named after the ford, not the community, which is why it's two words. And I get a lot of calls saying, knucklehead, Shallowford is one word. Well, the community is one word, but the actual ford is two. So that's why we call it that. And there's always been another crossing down here below Saxbahaw. So right where the landfill is now was also a place where you could cross if you had the right water. But that was pretty much it in the county. Otherwise, you weren't getting across that river. So downtown Haw River and downtown Swepsonville became very popular places. So the other part that is unique about the Haw River is that it has more fall per square mile than any other river in the Piedmont.
Wow.
And that's why we have textiles in this county. So as we grew in the 1700s, really the next 150 years, we continued to grow, and all of that growth was on the river. So Alamance County became a county in 1849. And at the time that happened, there were really no meaningful developments outside of the riverbanks. Graham didn't exist. Burlington didn't exist. There was a little bit of industry and people in the village of Alamance, which doesn't really count as not being on the river because it's on Great Alamance Creek. That's why it's there. But outside of the areas where there was water all the time, there were no people, no settlement. So when Alamance County was formed in 1849, they met on the river to talk about it on what is now Copeland Mill, sorry. So Copeland Mill, where the site is, that's where they had the meeting to decide they were gonna make Alamance County its own county, get away from Orange County. You know, we had a running feud with that side of the county for a very long time. And it made sense for us to be our own county because we didn't want to be a part of Orange County, and quite frankly, they didn't want us to be a part of them either. So we did it without violence because they were happy to be shed of us. Probably still happy about that, quite honestly. Just two very different places.
Why is that though?
Why are they two very different places?
No, why
Oh,
would they have to
What was the
be
original,
rid of
what
us?
was the original dispute?
Well, so the original dispute was, that's the Battle of Alamance, quite frankly, because Hillsborough was the seat of government, British government, and we were a bunch of redneck farmers who didn't care for them. So I don't think that part changed over the next 100 years. We were a long way from Hillsborough.
Well, that's what I always thought was the reason was they were trying to get you so you could get to the county seat in back in a day, or.
Yeah, that was the standard for people throughout the state. You should be able to do that. It was hard to do that. You had to cross.
Jackson County was made out of Macon and.
You had to cross the river,
Woodwood.
which you couldn't
Same
do very
time,
often.
yeah.
If the river was up, you couldn't get to Hillsborough. So if you had a court date, you better hope it doesn't rain. Just geography was a huge issue at that time, and culturally, they're different. So Hillsborough, to this day, they have the university, and that affects a lot of how Orange County thinks and feels. They're also primarily a British development, so most of the people there were British origin coming west from the eastern part of the state. Alamance County really didn't have that immigration pattern. So we had some of that, but a significant amount of our development here was from Germans coming south. So just different cultures. Yeah, we have Quakers, we have Lutherans, they have Methodists and Baptists. You have both of each, but it's just always been just two different cultures who haven't seen eye to eye. So I think perhaps had Orange County foreseen the development we were about to have and the growth we were about to have, that it might have gone differently. But as of 1849, we didn't have any of that. We had a bunch of grist mills and a bunch of farmers, and they had that. They didn't need us for that. So we're able to separate. Like I said, they met. It was called High Falls at that point, the area where Copeland is now. I don't really know where the High Falls name comes from. There's a lake that is Stony Creek Marina now, City Lake, that backs up all of that water body. So whether there's a falls in there that I don't know about, that's possible. The falls on the river right there are not particularly high, which would be an odd thing to name. Anyway, so that amount of fall that we had, the amount of elevation change that we had in that river, and that the way that the river is shaped and formed means that it was better for water power than any other place in the Piedmont. And that's why we had the growth that we did. So fast forward another 10 years, 20 years, around and after the Civil War, we had continued to grow because we'd learned how to harness that water power. Still didn't have electricity. Everything was manually powered by water wheels. But it was enough flow to be able to power equipment, starting with grist mills, of course, and then moving to actual textile equipment. So as the mills were being built, we had enough flow that they could turn a wheel that would physically turn gears that would move the textile machines. And if you go down east, they don't have that. They got a lot of water, but it's not moving that quickly. And you've got to do a lot of work to get it to move. You can do it, it's just you got to do a lot more work to get it to move. So this place was uniquely suited for that. Our river bank and our river bottoms are all hard rock. This is the farthest west point of the state that was formed by mountains, by tectonics, as opposed to by erosion. So the mountain range that is now Cane Creek Mountains Natural Area is part of, Occoneechee Mountain Range is part of, that is geological, that's one of the oldest mountain ranges in the world. And so that's where our river is based on that rock. Everything east of here is stuff that used to be part of those mountains. So all the sand hills, all the coastal plains, that's all been formed by erosion from these mountains. So our geology is just naturally different. It makes our river run faster. It means that you have rocks available that you can build dams out of. If you try to build a dam in Fayetteville, you're not going to be able to find the rocks for it. So it doesn't matter anymore. We can make it out of cement. But in 1850, that was a little harder. You needed to have that granite available to make a dam to power your mill. So it's a unique place geologically, which made it perfect for water power. So we started growing during and after the Civil War, almost exclusively on the river. So in that period of time, Alton Hall was created, Ossipee, Glencoe, Carolina Mill, Copeland Mill, Granite Mill and Hall River, a whole bunch of different names for the mill in Swetsonville, but the mill in Swetsonville, Virginia Mill, and the mill in Saxbahaw. And so those all really exploded in the second half of the 19th century. There was, at that time, really just the one development in Alamance County that was off of the river, and that's Graham. So Graham is a created town, one of the first planned communities in the history of the country. It didn't spring up like every other development on the East Coast. It was created by the county commissioners at that time when we became a county. So we needed a county seat. They wanted one that wasn't already occupied by people so that they would be able to share power, and they wanted to have cheap land. So they created this 2 square mile area of Graham, drew out the roads and drew out the lots on a piece of paper and started selling them. So we know the history of every lot here in the city of Graham because of that process. So that was pretty unusual at the time. Usually county seeds, state capitals would just naturally grow up because of where they were, and development would happen in strange ways. So it's very odd for a place to be planned in that way, and for all the streets to look exactly as they do on a map here. It's a very nice grid, and it has 4 roads coming in, 6 roads coming in from each direction, and they're all perfectly diagonal. That's not the way any other cities are in this state. So that's a unique history of Graham too. But that was the only place in Alamance County that had any growth at all that was off the river. So what's interesting about that process is that, so 150 years ago, we were a completely river-based county. Everything that we did was based on the power that the mill provided. And now 150 years later, we are one of the very few places in the country where waterfront property is less valuable than property on the water. So if you think about it, if you go to any of the cities on the East Coast, Boston, New York, Baltimore, the water is the driving force of those cities, and the property on the water is extremely valuable. So why aren't we like that? And the reason is basically because we used our river, but we used it for different purposes. So in all those towns, the river was the basis for shipping. They brought goods in on the boat, they took them off, and they took them off at the docks. So you wanted to be there at the dock so that you could get the goods, so you could sell the goods, so you could sell your stuff to the people getting off the boats. That was where it was all happening, was by the waterfront. If you've paddled down the Haw River, you know it's not great for shipping. It's usable for pushing and paddling, but not great for anything with a bow that goes more than a foot under the surface. So it wasn't usable for shipping. So we never had that situation where goods were coming and going on the water. We were using the water, but it was for an entirely different purpose, to turn machines. And our shipping got done on the trading path. When that was by foot, it was on the trading path. We used that trading path and made it into a train corridor, mostly the same path, crosses the exact same place in downtown Haw River. And then we used that trading path roughly for the interstate too. So I-85 is the path of the trading path. Goes to Greensboro, Salisbury, down to Charlotte. That's what the trading pad used to do, and that's why I-85 looks that way, because that's where the development was. And when they built the road, they just had to connect those developments that already existed. So entirely different way of using the water in Alamance County. So it made the water, Riverside, less valuable, less desirable to be in. So obviously we needed that water to turn our machines, but what else did we use the water for? We used it for taking away all the stuff we didn't need anymore when we got through manufacturing whatever we were making. It's a great plan, quite honestly. We use the river, it powers our machines. When we're done with it, we just put all our junk in there and it floats away and we never have to see it again. So that worked pretty well, which is why the textile industry in Alamance County absolutely exploded. We had all of that water power. We had a labor force that was looking for something to do. After the Civil War, the family farms were decimated here. Our crops were gone, their animals were gone. And it was really hard for the children to go out on their own. So people that were farmers were looking for another thing to do besides try to share their farm with their parents. So we had an easy labor force, and that's what made our textile industry absolutely explode. The very end of the 19th century, it got easier because we developed electricity and were able to convert our mills to electricity. So now, rather than physically having the water turn the wheels that turn the gears that turn the machines, we just had the water turn a turbine that made electricity and made it all easier. So all of the mills on the Haw River got converted to electricity after 1880. Vertical turbines for the most part. So the first electrical turbine in Alamance County was at Shallow Ford Natural Area. That used to be a mill called Geringer's Mill. Mr. Geringer lived up on the hill there. If you've ever been to Shallow Ford, if you walked in there, there's an old, not much left anymore, but an old chimney and a well up there, top of the hill. So that was Mr. Geringer's house. He lived there and walked down to the river every day to run his mill. So we had a vertical turbine there. It could power the grist mill. He could connect it by pulley system to a sawmill, to a couple other mills. I don't even remember what he was doing, but it was a one-stop shop. So it was one of the most popular places in the northern part of the county because he had it all there. You could go get whatever you needed cut or crushed or sewn there. So that was the first electrical powered turbine, and you can actually still see the dam, the remnants of the dam there. And if you go to Shallow Ford, the parking lot side of the river, you walk down to the river, there's two timbers that are still in the water there. So that was where the shaft was that powered his mill. So he had a little vertical shaft that dropped down in between those two timbers that are still there. So that's a really cool place to, if you know what you're looking at, it's a place to see. And so right now the paddle access steps there at the park, we have left up some timbers that were in a line all the way to the parking lot. And those timbers were what the metal shaft that turned all the machinery was resting on. It was a vertical turbine, there was a vertical shaft coming out of it, and then a gear to a horizontal shaft. And it was sat on fence posts and would spin in a little groove on those posts, and they're still there because he made them out of cedar. So there's still one or two there. So if you also notice some old mill equipment laying around in that area by the paddle access, we've left that there on purpose, just so people, that was how we found it. It disappears, it gets legs sometimes. People think they can sell that.
Oh, was there a dam there as well?
Yeah, that was what they called a crib dam. So it was two timber walls that they filled with rocks. So that's how you had two ways to make dams back then. You could make it out of stone if you were good, and you could cut stone, and you had mules, and all the things it took to build a proper stone dam like at Altamaha. Or you could build a crib dam, which is basically just you built two timber walls, filled the inside with small rocks, and that would hold for a lot of years.
I thought they were gonna take one of the dams down that way as they're working on the road.
So, working on taking dams down. Dams are cool, but ecologically, they're pretty awful. They disrupt how the river's supposed to flow, and they also make it impossible for the things that live in the river to get upstream, or downstream for that matter. So, over the past few years, we've taken down the remnants of a crib dam at Swetsonville, and the remnants of the dam in Hall River. And are working with the landowners over time to take down the ones that we're not using anymore. So the one you're talking about is in Ossipee. It's actually not on the main stem of the river, it's on the Reedy Fork.
Okay.
There's two dams there. One is at the Altamaha Paddle Access.
Right.
That one is on the main stem of the river. And then the other, the one farther south on Old 87, you can see, that's the Ossipee Mill Dam. And that one is owned by Glen Raven, but I think they are planning to take it down. That is not easy. It requires a lot of federal permits and a lot of engineers. So
There's a lot of
gotta want it.
stuff built up behind them that you have to do.
Yeah, so the dam remnants that we've taken down, they're easy. I mean, relatively easy. You literally have to get a track hoe in the water and they just dig it out. But that's the easy part. But dams that are still standing like that one, over the years, yeah, they trap tons of sediment back there. And inside that sediment is all the pollution we've been putting in the river for the past 100 years. So you can't just crack the dam and let it go down. They have to divert the water, they have to dig out all of that earth, and they have to put it in a landfill. Yeah, and then take the mill
Well,
down
the
and
sediment
re-divert
goes
it.
down the river and settles, and it covers up all your crayfish and
Yeah.
small fish fry and, everything.
Yeah,
It'll just cover everything up, so that's one reason too, they can't just open the dam.
yeah.
Brian, I think we're working on that section from Shalford up the river towards Reedy Fork.
Yeah. You know,
And we found where I call it the waterway, the runway, where they diverted the water to
the
run
race,
with.
we call it a race.
The race, that's the word I couldn't think of. So that race was for the Garinger Mill.
No,
No,
because the river has so much fall, you can put a mill every mile. And that far, where you're working now, was for an old mill called Iola.
Iola.
Iola Mill.
Was that a lumber sawmill?
No, that was the first part of what is now Glen Raven's operation.
So
Really?
it was certainly a grist mill, and whether they put a woolen mill there, I'd have to go back and look, I don't remember.
Is that a historic place, or can the stones be used for building the trail through there?
Yeah, you can use the stones. I mean, don't take
You
that.
can't lift them, but we.
Don't take that anything that's standing, but the parts on the side are really cool. So to the extent you can still determine that it's a mill, it's worth leaving. The stuff that's falling on the ground. So that's a crib dam too, which is why it's not there anymore. So they have
Yeah,
to
there's no
dig-
evidence of a dam, because a crib dam would all disappear, wouldn't it?
It turns into rocks.
And the rocks get
Rocks are
moved.
still there, but yeah, they get pushed downriver a little bit over time.
Yeah,
But yeah, those old sites hold a little bit of water because literally the rocks just would have fallen. So there's a foot or so of rock, more rocks, and they'll hold that a foot of
yeah,
water.
there is an island there.
Yeah, so that island is probably made by the race. So it's probably, it could be a natural island. It's most likely not.
Because the race is up, is 50 yards in, we can tell the race.
Yeah, so they would have to dig out a place for the water to divert. Lots of times they would use a natural creek on the downstream side of the dam because it's just less digging. So they would build a race and it would feed into what was already a feeder creek.
I got you.
And yeah, we'd create a little island there below the dam.
About what year would that have been in service?
Iowa Mill. I didn't bring that book. I'll say 1870, and I could be off like a year. But yeah, sometime pre-electricity. It was a grist mill. It was. They never had a factory. That was Gantz, and they built that place. The factory that they built would have been at Alpha.
There is, right there, between those 2 points, there's a monument in the ground. It's maybe 20 feet off the river, but we can't find any numbers on it. It's a geographical,
Border marker.
yeah.
Oh,
Pretty substantial,
It's
isn't
a
it?
lot. It's just a granite.
Yes.
It's a stone that marks the corner of a lot. Is what it
Well,
is.
it's concrete with a little round dome on the top.
Does it have metal on it?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, well, then it could be a geological marker.
but there's no, there's no,
It doesn't have markings, and it's just a monument that they did,
Yeah.
the surveyors.
it's just, there's one just like it down at Glencoe.
Yeah, that's just a surveyor mark. The surveyors used to, at that time, use the tree, old gum tree. Well, that's not that helpful anymore. So they got smart. Once trees started dying, they got smart and started putting iron posts in the ground, which you see everywhere. But those also get moved and disturbed and hard to find. So they, if you pay the money, they put the stone monument in there or the cement
Yeah.
monument in there. And you can always find the corner. Yeah, Tommy?
These mill races, was that mill employees that built them?
So that's a mix. So you wouldn't have mill employees until they were built. You wouldn't have a mill because you couldn't do anything. So most of those mill races predate any concept of there being a mill there. They almost all started as small mills, grist mills, and were turned into a bigger operation. So no, they wouldn't have been mill employees. They would have either been the people who were building it. That was the first few years of their effort to get a mill there, or slave labor if it was available. And a lot of places in the county didn't have slave labor. Some of them we know did. So John Newland and Saxbahaw, that race is a little hard to see at this point. It's hard to know that there's a race there, but that was a really big race, and that was a slave race. He was actually one of the first people in the county. He was Quaker, and he freed his slaves before the Civil War, which caused a lot of consternation for people in the area. There were some lawsuits about he didn't have the right to do that, but he freed his slaves. And I don't know that we have great records on who built the other races, and whether they were slave built. I don't know. Some of them seem really hard to do. The mill at Carolina Mill, or the race at Carolina Mill, is huge. That's the longest.
That's
mill.
3/4 of a mile. I've measured it.
It's the longest one on the river. It's the longest one I've seen in North Carolina. I might like to do this on a weekend, go around and measure mills, but I don't. So it's possible that there's a longer mill race out there. But yeah, it's hard to imagine that getting built any other way, but the timing of that mill, that's a post-Civil War, mill, so it wouldn't have been labor, it's just a heck of a lot of work.
But it's also pre-steam shovels too, right? It was all hand?
It would have been hand, yeah, I mean, it was possible that there were steam shovels, but I don't have any, I've never heard of one of those being
Okay.
here in Alamance County, so, no, I don't think so. It would have been.
I hope.
I mean, you get it close and the water helps, right? I mean, if you divert water into there, it helps get rid of some of that dirt, pre-sedimentation and erosion controls. We didn't worry that much about it. But it's still a heck of a lot of work, and you gotta be careful digging a little trench and then letting the river handle it, because the river handles it however it wants to, and it may or may not go to your mill, once you start diverting water into it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, anyway, so that's why, that use of the river is why we have a lot of development along the river. But other than mill development, it's not that popular today. It's not that valuable of land because of the pollution that we put back in it. So almost every one of these mills had a dyeing or bleaching operation. So they get the cotton in or the wool in, they have to clean it, they have to card it, they have to twist it to make it into the yarn. And then they have to make it whatever color they want the fabric to be. And that process is dirty. They bleach it to get it not brown anymore. I mean, cotton and wool are both kind of gross when you start them. They're not white. They're pretty brown. And you know, if you're making a canvas bag, great, that's the color. Or feed sacks, you know. But anything else that you want to be clothes or desirable fabric, you got to bleach it first, and then you got to dye it. You can't reuse that stuff for the most part. They use it for a little bit and then wash it down the river, and they just let that stuff go in the river. You know, it's easy at this point in time to look back and judge that. Like, how could you do that? It's really, at the time, it's just what we did. And the modern concepts that we have of how we as humans affect the environment were really foreign to people in the 1800s. I mean, if you think about what impact we had on this country, the country and nature seemed overwhelming. It seemed like an inexhaustible resource because it was so big and the number of us was so small. It's hard to blame people for feeling like there's literally nothing we can ever do that's going to have a substantial impact on nature. And even if you did feel that way, there wasn't much you could do about it because your neighbor was going to dump it in the river, and if you didn't do that, you weren't going to have much of a business. So just plug government. That's why we have government, to set the bottom floor for what everybody does, so that you don't get undercut by a neighbor doing the wrong things.
So would people get their drinking water from something other than the Hawk? Were they getting it from,
Farther up the river.
Yeah,
Clean Creek or?
preferably. So yeah, you'd have a spring or you'd have a well.
Yeah.
Or both. Those were all, the wells were all hand dug too, so you had to want it. They're hand dug, like the one at Shallow Ford is hand dug and rock lined. So you dug a really deep hole till you hit water, kept going a little while, and then put rocks all the way up, so that you can get dirt in it and it can collapse constantly.
How deep is it, you know?
Well, till you keep going. I mean, it varies everywhere. Just like when we go, but that one I think is 60 feet, which is a heck of a hole. On top of the hill. They built it on top of the hill, which is great for the flood, not great for the well. So yeah, it's a compromise. But yeah, that's a deep well, a lot of work.
When I was a child, I went to Alexander Wilson, we rode the bus home, I lived on 54. Well, the sides of the bridges, were solid concrete, but as you got to the bridge over the river on the school bus, you're tall enough up to see, and every day we had bets eventually going on what color the river would be. Red, blue, green, depending on what color they were dyeing socks or whatever up the river.
Yeah.
That's what color the river was, and I mean, it was always exciting to see what color the river's gonna be today. Now I look back like,
Scary, yeah.
everybody going, what were we doing, oh my God. But, it was the way you grew up.
Yeah,
I mean, it was just
what
part of
you
growing
did.
up,
Yeah. Alexander Wilson's an interesting spot too, so that's named after the guy who had a school there, Alexander Wilson, but he also had a mill there.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And so if you cross the street, to the south side of 54,
Okay.
the school is on the north side of
Right.
54, and on the south side of 54, along the creek there, is, you can still see the remnants of his dam and his mill.
There's a creek there?
Pretty, it's not right there, but yeah, it's Haw
Yeah.
Creek, just down a little bit. So it's on Haw Creek, and just south of 54, you can see
Oh, I'll have
the
to
remnants of the
see
dam
if
there.
I can find it.
You can't see it from the road, but it's not,
Before Swetsonville Road. Before you get to Swetsonville.
no, no, just south of Swetsonville.
South of Swetsonville,
Yeah,
okay.
but it's close. Yeah, there's only one, so there's the river, but then on 54, there's just the one water body, and that's Haw Creek, that flows into there. So let's see.
I'll have to
So,
talk to you later.
yeah. So this is Haw Creek,
Right.
and, it flows into the river here. It goes up through, this is Swetsonville, so it's just south of Swetsonville. It actually runs through the old county landfill, and then runs up, so 54 is like right here. And then it runs all the way up to, that's Walmart in there. So
Okay.
when your car leaks in the Walmart parking lot in Mebane, that's where it ends. It ends up in the
It
river.
runs through the old landfill, that must carry a few things with it.
That wasn't a great plan, I'll tell you that. I mean, it was a better plan than we had, because until 1973, there was no landfill. So every parcel that we acquire has a hole full of trash on it. They would throw it in the hole, occasionally set the hole on fire, which was fun. But there are also a lot of stuff that was never gonna burn, so that's a separate hole with all your washers and dryers and bedpans, and that's what we find in these piles, and every parcel we get has that pile on it. And as the guy who laid out the trail, and the guy who's in charge of the Parks Department, I wanted those piles cleaned up. So I always ran the trail right through the middle of the trash pile. So that the guys would have to clean it up, and they knew full well what I was doing. And so the section, right here that we were just talking about, which is at Long Meadow, trailhead, across the river from ACC, so just south of I-40. There's a trailhead there, and it goes straight down to the river and back up. Well, the straight down to the river part, I ran it through a trash pile, and they cleaned up about 80% of it, and then said, we're not doing it anymore. So there's still some white goods you can see along that section of trail next time you walk that. Feel free to take them. My guys are done. They just got done. Yeah, so, let's go back to the development of the river. So, all the development that was happening in the river, by the turn of the century, it was becoming a gross place to be by the river. It smelled a little bit, all the dyes were in there, all the bleaches were in there, and so it was no longer a desirable place to live. So about that time, Graham was developing a little bit further. Burlington had been created as a company shops for the railroad, and those began to grow as the place where people who had the money wanted to live. And that continued until today, quite frankly. That's why those towns were tiny towns at the time, but they continued to grow. They were a more desirable place to live than these mill towns that smelled and were dirty. And everybody moved off the river into town. They had the luxury to do it. As we developed, they didn't need the water anymore. They didn't use it as a water source. They really didn't need it as we developed plumbing. They didn't need it to carry things away. The mill still used it for that, but you didn't need it for refuse or anything else. You didn't need it for food anymore. It was hard to find food. You either grew it or caught it. In the 1800s, as we got to the 1900s, you just started to go to the store or the market. So it wasn't that important to live on a place where you could find fish. It wasn't that important to live on ground that was very fertile, and the river ground is the most fertile because of the constant flooding. So it's desirable for growing and fishing. Once you don't need those things anymore, it's not really worth the smell. So as we work with landowners on building the trail and conserving the property now, these parcels have most likely been in their family for 100 years because it wasn't something that anybody would want to buy. So you just gave it to your kids, which makes the job interesting, which means when you knock on the door of somebody who lives by the river, you don't know what you're gonna get because it's a crazy mix. Folks who've been living in an undesirable place for 100 years are doing that because they're poor, they didn't have the ability to move anywhere else. That's why that land is still in their family. And so it's a really interesting mix of people that have ended up there. And a lot of that is still family land. So yeah, again, the river, just by the middle of the 1900s, you guys who are from here know it had the reputation that it's fighting back from now. It was a place where your parents didn't let you go. It changed colors every day. And you know, in that span of 100 years, it went from the most important place in the county, the only place in the county, to a place that didn't exist in the minds of people who lived, or was a place to avoid. And 100 years is a really short amount of time for that level of transformation to happen to a place. I mean, I can't think of many other examples where, you know, Boston Harbor didn't go from a very popular place in the Revolution to a place you couldn't go anymore. It just stayed an important part of the town because it was already developed, it continued to develop, and became the heart of the town. Very different here. People who grew up in Burlington, who live in Burlington, have a real disconnect with the river, and in my opinion, a disconnect from nature, quite honestly. I mean, conservation is not a big deal here. Outdoor recreation was not a big deal here. Certainly hasn't been until pretty recently. And I think that's a big part of it. It's like the place where that should naturally happen was on the river, and that was the place you weren't allowed to go. So where'd you go? You went to the mall, or you cruised Graham Hopedale, apparently, or cruised Maine and Burlington.
Then it went to Graham Hopedale.
Yeah, I'm not,
Yeah.
I don't know that part, so I love those stories, but, yeah, I grew up cruising a whole different road in a different, still cruising, but yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting impact that it's had on our culture. So when we all started, when I came here and got involved in this effort around the Hog River Trail, I was hired by an odd group of people. So I was on a one-year grant that was created by Elon University and gotten by Elon University. And that grant was mostly to do conservation work. So I was intended to talk to the people who lived along the river, talk to them about why conservation was important, convince them to do conservation easements on their land. But that grant was matched by the recreation departments. City of Graham put money in, City of Burlington put money in to match the grant, and the county was too cheap to put money in, but they gave me a 30-year-old car, and they let me sit in the conference room. Thanks, guys. That was awesome. Until I showed up the first day, and they're like, "Oh, you starting today?" Oh, we forgot all that. I don't know. Go in that room. So that was an interesting experience.
They were grooming you, Brian, look where you are.
Yeah, right. It's all worked out. They set the bar really low, which was all part of the plan. So intended to do conservation work, but also had this recreational aspect, and all of those municipalities in the county, they wanted a trail, so they were on the idea of let's do a trail by the river. I had no idea what that meant or how to do that or whatever. Just like, I don't know, go build a trail. Okay. Do we own any land? No, we don't own any land. I'm like, okay, cool. So literally my first day, because I had 5 bosses who had contributed to this grant, and I was like, if you guys don't mind, just go around the room and tell me what success looks like on this grant at the end of a year. I've got a year here. What is success going to be? 5 totally different answers. And I was like, great, sounds like I get to do whatever I want. And one of you is going to be happy, which is the max possible under this expectation regime you've set up. So whatever, I'm just going to do what I want. That's the one thing I'm good at, doing whatever I want. So I started doing conservation work. So I started talking to landowners. I just go knock on the door. Hey, Hog River is an incredible natural resource. It's important for conservation. Would you like to talk about conserving your land? And oh my Lord. If they let me finish my sentence without slamming the door, it was just to laugh and ridicule. Because even, that was less than 20 years ago, and the concept of the Haw River was a place that was worth conserving was completely foreign to them. It just did not have that consensus in this community that this is a valuable resource, that this is something we need to take care of and protect. They thought it was dirty and disgusting, and there's nothing there worth saving. So why would they do a conservation deal? Why would they sacrifice something to preserve something that wasn't worth saving? So it did that a few dozen times, and it was like, oh, this is not going to work. So then we started just focusing on the trail. So I was a newcomer here. I grew up in the western part of the state. So by the time I got here, the river was clean. If I walked by the river, if I paddled the river, like, I didn't see the problem. It was a beautiful place to be. It's definitely something worth conserving at that point. So it was obvious for me that we need to work on this river, and I think we all realized, okay, our goal here is to change the community's mind, and the only way to do that is to get them down to the river, and that's trails. So what worked for us was putting trails on the river. I have been doing some version of this talk for a lot of years, and I don't think I've ever once changed someone's mind on how great the river is. It's just, I can't talk people into it. If you go to the river, your mind is changed in about 10 minutes. It's an incredible place. It sells itself. The job is just to get people there. So we just started building paddle accesses, building land trail, whatever we could do to have an excuse to get people to the river. And as soon as they got down there, their mind was changed. And those first few years, it was literally a matter of measuring your success by how often you got laughed at, which was multiple times a week. Like, what do you do? Oh, I'm the Haw River Trail Coordinator. We're building a trail to bring people to the river. Like, you're an idiot. Okay. That's not gonna work, out of towner. So that was fun. And, that started at like 5 times a week, and over a period of years, it went down to once a week, and it doesn't even happen anymore. Quite honestly, I don't have that conversation anymore about how ridiculous this is. But in those first few years, we went to the county planning board, and I won't tell you who was involved, but I think we were trying to get some support from the planning board for something we were trying to do and talk to them about this effort. And I think I talked for 10 minutes, and they were like, "You fool! Nobody's gonna do that. Plus, you put those aluminum canoes in there, they're gonna pollute the river with the metal. So you can't. No, never mind. Get out of here." I just laughed. Like, that was not a place I was gonna get much success there. But that was the official county position that I was working for, so that was sweet. But just a lot of effort. Over the years, it's just changed 100%. Those first few paddle accesses and trails were built were people with vision donating land to us. George and Jerry Nall donated the first piece of property in Glencoe that we got. The Glencoe Paddle Access now was able to work with WRAL, Capital Broadcasting, to get the section of trail from that paddle access down to Carolina Mill, and they did an easement with us there. They still own Carolina Mill, because at that time, pre-2008, they were looking for real estate investments because real estate was really high. So they had.
They just bought it.
They just bought an investment.
So WRAL TV owns that now?
Yes.
So that's not exactly right. It's Capital Broadcasting, which owns WRAL TV. But
Yeah, I've
Capital
always
Broadcasting.
wondered who owned it. I would love to know it, but you never can find out who to go to say, "Can I buy this?"
Capital
So,
Broadcasting.
okay. Well, now I know.
Yeah.
Once a month, they send a landscaper over to mow the grass.
Yeah.
And we talked to him one time. I said, "You come all the way over from Raleigh just to mow the
Does
lawn."
he really? He's their guy, and they just send him.
They have a contract.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's funny.
What's with the Army thing
What?
at, like, Carolina Mills? There's some, like, Army?
I don't think so. So the Army involvement that we had was at the Western Electric plant. So
Okay, maybe
prior
that's-
to that being a Western Electric plant, that was an Army missile facility. Prior to it being a missile facility, they built training bombers during World War II there. So they needed to teach pilots how to fly. Where Walmart is in Graham Hopedale was a runway. And so they built the planes in the factory and brought people over to teach them how to fly. Metal was too valuable at that time for the war effort. So they used wood. So they built the planes out of wood. And they sent, Newbie up in a wooden plane to figure out how to stay aloft for the, 3 hours that it would take for them to get shot down and take out the theater.
Submarines to visit the Titanic?
So, yeah, I know. So, yeah, that facility, which is not on the river, but close, has a really rich art
Well, there's some
history.
army thing that I'll have to.
So there's an old rumor that the water tower there on the top of the hill from Carolina Mill is a missile silo. It is not, but I tell people that a lot. So that rumor's been out there, but as far as I know, there's no military involvement on any of the mills.
I'll take a picture next time.
Okay, yeah.
How long is the river from where it comes in to where it goes out? Is it 60 miles?
Goes into the county,
Yeah,
35-ish,
It's
37.
35.
Yeah.
It just feels like 60 when you're blazing trails.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like when you're paddling.
and we've only got about 20 of trail, right?
Yeah, so we've got 25 miles of trail, but a lot of that is not linear, so it's loops and things, so I think just under 20 miles of actual land trail.
Got a long way to go.
We do. Yeah, you got a lot of digging to do. My
I'm
digging
only
days are over.
83, we gotta
You're
hurry.
killing it, yeah. Yeah. Well, and so the Haw River Trail just became a state trail last week, which generated some great publicity, but, Greensboro paper, came out to Glencoe, we did a little walk, and I was just telling them the story of that first section of trail that we built. It was just me, so I was hired by the Parks Department, but the park staff was not exactly on board for this effort. I was just some fancy kid they had brought in from somewhere else, and, like, whatever I was gonna do was fine, but that didn't mean they were gonna, like, work. So I did not have anybody to help put that trail on the ground. So we got the prisoners from the Dan River Prison Farm to come out. And they, at that time, had work crews. They would go out and do work for local governments, which was normally painting and stuff like that, where they paint every outlet in the county has been painted over. Because all of the prison crews did all the painting here for decades, and they're in prison, they're not that interested in removing the plate to the outlet, so it's painted over though. So go in an old building that's a government building, and I guarantee you that outlet's been painted over. That's why. Yeah, Tommy.
So inmates started building the trail?
So inmates built the trail. Yeah, I met them out there one day with they had a guard, right? Yeah, luckily. But there were, I don't know, 12, 13 guys from prison, not jail. They were like prison, like they were there for a reason. And they were like, okay, well, what do you want us to do? Like, well, we're gonna build trail. Here's some really sharp implements. I'm gonna walk this way and you follow me with the sharp implements. So I had some questions about my life choices on that day. Because we didn't even have trail tools back then. Like, we didn't have road hoes. We had bush axes and shovels. And so, yeah, you get some dude who's got a long stint behind you with a bush axe. You're like, what am I doing? And the guard, he's in the back. So he doesn't see it. I could die 4 times before he even notices. Yeah, that was questionable. But they did a good job. I mean, as good as they were going to do. They weren't really trail lovers, I would say, prior to their time in prison. But they were happy to be there, not in jail that day. So they were in a good mood, and we had a good time. And they cut a rough trail. That trail to this day has a lot of stumps in it that you guys have to dig out.
It's also the most popular section too.
It's crazy about it.
You get more traffic there than any other section because
Yeah.
it's not a hard trail.
So over the years, we've gotten better at building trail, gotten volunteers to help us build trail, different kinds of volunteers. Those guys were, I guess, volunteers as well, but volunteers not at gunpoint.
Model prisoners.
Yes,
and
yes.
just prisoners.
Yes, these guys are much happier. So yeah, it's become a sophisticated effort, and now we're at a point where, as staff who does the land acquisition, we cannot keep up with these guys building trail. As soon as we give them a mile of trail, they call back in 2 weeks and say, "Well, we're done with that." I'm like, oh, it took me years to get that. I can't get you anything else right now. So that's a good problem to have.
So what's the relationship between the Mountains to Sea Trail and the Haw River Trail?
So in Alamance County, they're the same thing. Once you get out of Alamance County, they go different places. But the Haw River Trail is envisioned to go from Haw River State Park on Guilford-Rockingham County line all the way down to Jordan Lake, Savia. And so it runs the length of the Haw River. So the Mountains to Sea Trail joins the Haw River Trail. When it's all done, we'll join it in Altamahaw and go down to Saxapahaw. So for the entire stretch of Alamance County, all but for a couple miles, it's all the same trail, and will be double blazed as Mountains to Sea Trail and Haw River Trail, Haw River State Trail. Got to fix how I say that. Apparently,
And how much land is there still to acquire for making that stretch?
so much. Yeah, we've got half of it. And half of it in 15 years is slow, but we're putting a mile of trail a year on the ground. That's better than anybody else in the state. It's
Try to
really
make it 2.
good. Yes, if we had it's resource based in part. Like if we had more money, if we had more people, great, we could go more quickly. It's also people based. So we have never taken land. So when you build greenways in cities, it's really easy because they just tell them they're putting a greenway in and that's the end of it. And so, yeah, it's really impressive that, Raleigh has, 80 miles of greenway, whatever they have. But they just eminent domain it, or they use sewer easements that they already have. We don't do any of that, and there's not any existing infrastructure there. We literally knock on the doors and ask people to let us use their land. And
So you get an easement for 99 years or
we get a forever easement.
forever easement?
That's our preference, right? So,
Do they get money? Is there money?
yeah, usually,
Some money?
it's not a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
not tens of thousands
Oh,
of dollars, but it's something, and then for some people, that's a meaningful amount.
Oh, yeah.
And so we work really hard to be able to provide that.
But if
More
the
than-
landowner wants it, the county has also paid for a very expensive fence
Yes.
between the property and the trail. So
Right.
that when you're walking along, you got the river on one side, you got a very, very nice fence on the
We
other.
do whatever it takes to get
Yeah.
that landowner to yes, because it's a negotiation. I mean, we call it a negotiation. It's not a negotiation if you can't say no. It's begging. And we can't say no because it has to be there, right? We can't go around, the river only goes one
Right.
place. So it's not negotiating, it's begging,
Well, why are you putting up a fence? I mean, why?
because they want it.
Comfort,
The landowner wants it,
Yeah.
just so people don't get off the trail.
Right.
Come under the-
They got all sorts of crazy reasons.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, some of them have animals and they're convinced
Oh,
that
yeah.
they're gonna be people. They're not worried about their animals hurting people. They're worried about people hurting their animals.
Yeah.
Yeah, the legend of cow tipping is strong, and they think that's a very pervasive problem. It is not, but they're convinced, and they also, they're fairly convinced that it's gonna lead to people robbing their house, which doesn't logically make any sense.
Uh-huh.
Because if I'm a burglar, I'm not gonna hike a mile to steal your TV.
that's right.
I'll just go to your driveway, it's right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's way more complicated to hike in and carry it out, like that,
Yeah.
no, that's not, but whatever. It's hard to tell people that, and it's hard to get them to believe you. But those are the conversations we have.
Yeah.
Are people gonna start fires down there? No. Why would people start fires in your backyard? That doesn't make any sense. We don't have these problems, but people, naturally worry about them. Where we have problems is where people say no, and we have to route the trail around their land. Because then you're putting their house in between people and the river.
Yeah.
And people wanna go to the river. So if you let them be by the river, they'll stay there, but if you put them on the other side, they're gonna walk through your yard.
Yeah.
So that's tough. And then once that happens, it's very hard to convince them otherwise, but, we've had some success. More than half of our landowners donate. It's not a huge amount of money if they're in a position to do it.
So they actually, you actually get ownership of that land, or if they own it, you just have the easement?
Depends, yeah, we do both. So our preference is probably to own it, just long-term future problems with the next landowner, we'd rather just own it.
Yeah.
But if they don't wanna do that, they don't wanna do that. So we'll take an easement,
Yeah.
we'll do a lease, we don't like it,
Yeah.
cause it's a lot of work to get the trail on the ground, and you don't wanna risk them coming back and saying, I think I'm
Totally.
but you take what you can get. And a lot of times what we can get is nothing. A lot of people say no to us. And so we call them back the next year and they say no again. And we do this for years. And eventually they say, oh God, stop calling. What is it? What do I have to do to get you to stop coming by my house? I'm like, oh, we need an easement. Fine. Take the easement.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it works, or we're in a position now where we have a lot of children
Yeah.
who understand that this is a great thing,
Yeah.
whose parents think it's ridiculous, and so they're like, you don't have to wait a few years, but in a few years, I'll do it. So, yeah.
What about you've got a landowner on this side, you didn't wanna play landowner on this side, what about,
No, you have to build a bridge. You can't do that.
well,
On
or,
one side
or use an existing, use existing bridges, do you?
Yeah, we don't, yeah, not really. So we had to decide a long time ago which side of the
Which
river
side
was
of the
gonna
river
be.
you
And so the long-term plan is both sides of the river.
Okay.
We would like to have both sides of the river all the way down.
Whoa.
Yeah, let's get one first. So
too
we're
much work.
focusing a little bit on one, but if river becomes available on either side, we're interested.
We crossed the river at Three Governors Bridge. Is that the only, we crossed from the north to the south, right?
And in Saxball.
And then in Saxville, we crossed back.
With the river trail, one of the island trails?
So the island trail is actually not part of it because it's an island and we don't have a bridge at the end. So the trail goes from, the west side of the river, above the bridge, and then crosses the bridge and it goes past the mill along that river walk south, towards Orange County. So, but long-term, I think as we continue to develop as a county, the demand for this continues to increase. The demand for surface trail continues to increase. So the hiking trail is what we build now because it's cheap, and easy, and those were, priorities for the first few years. Over time, people are demanding, a more of a greenway feel, and you need to find a place to do that. And so the other side of the river, a lot of places where we have these nature trails, I think we like to build towards them being surface greenway. Not necessarily paved, some of them you could pave. Paving gets difficult when you have the level of flooding that we have, so they may be gravel, whatever, but surface like American Bracken Trail, in certain places.
It'd be like bicycle trails, because
Yeah.
that's the up and coming thing.
Yeah, it's bikes, yeah, you could, strollers is the key, right? Yeah. Strollers on our current trail is not a lot of fun. You gotta have a resilient baby or a really good stroller, or both. Yeah, so, there's a huge amount of, young parents that come out with their strollers. And I was doing, King Creek, a year or two ago, I was doing a politician visit, right? So we do a lot of these. Politicians come out, we're gonna hike and talk about how important this is. Can you please give us some money? So we're doing that at King Creek with, I don't even remember, Sunny Daly maybe, I don't remember. We got about halfway up and there's this poor young mother there with her stroller halfway up. Like she has just jostled this child halfway up the mountain and then just like, is either gotta go down or suck it up and go up and around. And I'm just like, we can't do this. We've got to carry this stroller. So me and another guy carried this stroller all the way up that mountain and back down because you can't push it. We don't build trails like that.
Yeah.
So there's huge demand for that. And everywhere we have a surface trail, Cane Creek is popular. It's the least beautiful park that we have in the county, that trail. It's like logged over pine trees, not great. But it's really popular just because they want that surface. And our walking tracks around wherever we put a walking track. We put a walking track around a dumpster.
Eli,
They'll be out there doing it. I mean, every day they're at the walking track, does not matter. So, yeah, there's a demand out there for that and love to have it by the river. Love to put tracks somewhere that are actually attractive to walk. I walk at Bill Cook all the time. Moderately attractive place to walk. That's all I'm giving you.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Well, I do know, being disabled, that if you are disabled, you want that. You focus on that, what you can go to.
Yeah, and it's a tough balance because we do have people who, we talk about all the time about the accessibility challenges we have. And when you don't have those challenges, you don't think about them, for one. And two, we also, on some level, what we're trying to do here is create a wilderness experience for people who live in town. So what I'm trying to do when we design a trail and build a trail is help people forget that they are in town and make them feel, when you go somewhere new, there's a part of your mind that thinks, okay, I'm Lewis and Clark out here. Like I'm walking somewhere nobody's ever walked. And that's an exciting feeling, right? It's ridiculous, but it's an exciting feeling, and we want people to be able to get lost out there and feel a journey of discovery. That's why they're there. That's hard to do in an area that's surfaced and doesn't have any roots and is perfect. So it's a balance. We need to have areas where everybody can walk or roll or however they get there, but we don't want to do that at the expense of some of our backcountry places, because the backcountry places are important.
What are there single landowners with big chunks along the river?
Yes, I
And
know
how
their
many?
names. I know where they live.
Well, a lot of the lots are deep, but it's very small to the river, right? It might be 100 feet, but then it goes out 400 yards to
So
the
where
road.
are the big chunks?
Big chunks in Saxbahaw, a couple big chunks up north.
Isley property's been sold, I believe.
The what property?
Isley?
Well, we heard it sold.
Yeah.
Oh, I need to know about that. I didn't know about that.
Just recently we
I'm asking
heard.
a lot of questions about that parcel.
Where is that?
Jane Isley Farm,
Oh,
strawberries.
yeah, Jane.
She's not in great health, and we love Jane, wonderful person, not particularly inclined towards trail. So we had a lot of conversations with her over the years where she told us what we could do. And we
Also,
did
the
that.
historic house there at Haw River, the whole.
Yeah, the whole house. Not a big parcel, but an important parcel. So the whole house, the old governor's house in Haw River. We've got 7 miles of trail to the north of that, 2 miles to the south of it, and about 300 feet behind it where we can't walk. It is for sale for a significant price.
But it's off the market, they said. She took it off.
Yeah. So what we need, quite honestly, is an investment fund or someone with a large amount of money to help. Like things like a old house. You need somebody to buy it, give us a trail easement and sell it. Which I would love to do, but I'm not quite as liquid as I might like to be to buy $1.5 million house and then resell it. I mean, successful trails have that, somebody who can fill that role, and we don't have it yet, but that would be great.
What's the width of your easements?
It's all over the place. It's whatever we can negotiate with them. Ideally, it's 300 feet. It's not 300 feet. It's usually 75.
Why?
We've done 25. Because that's what it took to get it done. Yeah, so you want that flexibility. So the trail doesn't change. The trail is 4 feet wide, no matter how big the easement is. It doesn't matter. It's just, can we move it? When the flood happens and it changes the topography there, do we have the flexibility to route the trail somewhere else? That's why we want the space. So if you're locked into this corridor and then that washes away, or in the alternative gets covered in 8 feet of mud, it's just less convenient for our awesome trail builders to go out there and fix it. So we try to keep that flexibility, but again, it's not a negotiation, it's begging, so we take what we get.
What's the backstory on the industrial facility that's being built at 40, right across from the Long Meadow Trail at the town?
Yeah, that's an attractive piece of land because of its location. So it's a logistics facility, it's being spec built, they don't even have a tenant yet. Worked with that landowner a little bit before they built it to get an easement. It's really a difficult time to do that because they got a lot of moving parts. And so it didn't happen, but I think when it's done, they're doing a lot of grading back there now and whatever. But hopefully when it's done, we'll be able to get a trail corridor back there. That other side of the river, so this is between I-40 to the south and Town Hall River, Highway 70 to the north. The east side of the river there has a lot of big parcels. There's only 5 parcels that make up that whole stretch. So
That's the other side.
it's the other side. Yeah, don't worry. But we'd like to be able to get that long term. So I have a really long list of properties I want to get one day. So that's on it. At this point, you know, we've been for the development of this thing, been able to just take opportunities where they come, right? You just cherry pick the good ones. We got a chance here, let's go get it. As you get more and more done, those opportunities become less available, and you get places where you have to get it. Like the whole house, we have to get it now. And so it's a lot harder to get little sections of trail.
You just spoke about you have to get it. Did you have anything like they got going on at the Circle Eminent Domain?
So it's a thing that we could do, and a lot of trails do that. We have never done it, A, because we don't have the political support for it. Our commissioners are not gonna say yes to that. And B, it's just not what we want. So
Yeah.
if you
Burn
start,
bridges.
if you start off with an adversarial relationship with a landowner, it really gets bad. We don't have a single bad relationship with a landowner. They maybe start very skeptical, but after a year or so, they're all in. The guys who thought this was, you know, did it for the money or did it to shut me up, you know, 2 years later, they're down at the trail handing out lemonade, whatever. They love it. You know, it's a great thing, and you want to have a positive relationship, or at least a neutral one going in. If they go in hating everybody, it's tough. So, we're gonna try it this way. I'm not to say in 20 years we won't get down to 5 parcels, and we'll see. But
So if it does come down, you can do that. We don't want.
it's
If
doable.
we have to, we will.
It's doable, yeah. Right now, if I brought that motion to the county commissioners, there would be a lot more people saying no than people saying yes.
How is the land for the landfill acquired,
The new landfill or the old landfill?
the new landfill?
Eminent domain. Which is actually a great example.
Yeah,
So that's
ugly
that was a
fight.
1,500 acre parcel called Alston Quarter. It's been 1,500 acres. It's what's left over of what the king gave out. Never been subdivided. So the county wanted to put a landfill down there. Why the county put a landfill on the river?
Well, they put it on everywhere on the river. They're on Cooper Road, they're down below Swepsonville on Arnold, it's always been on the river.
Yeah, not a great plan.
But
But-
they justified it because your runoff and stuff is gonna run towards the river and it's
Yeah.
easy to test. to see
Pittsburgh
your
gets it. Well,
landfill.
whatever. Our water, Pittsburgh water.
It was ugly.
So there were several locations for that landfill when they were citing it, but they ended up using that one. And they used eminent domain on that property. So that was owned by the Cameron family in Wilmington, it still is. And they said, well, fine, we can't stop you, but you at least gotta buy the whole thing. You gotta buy all 1,500 acres. I said, nah, we only really need about 350, we'll just take that. And then the rest of your property can be next to the landfill, which is not great for property values. So, fast forward 50 years, I'm driving to Wilmington to sit down with the Camerons to try and buy the other 1,100 acres. And they're like, y'all had your chance. Yeah, exactly. That's how that conversation went.
Really?
So it's tough, still working on them. But
We need to bring Will for dinner.
but when you start off with a negative relationship, you end up with a negative relationship. And, you know, that's why we don't do it at other places.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was awesome. I talked too long, didn't I? So,
No,
Not at all.
appreciate it, guys. I'll come back and do another topic sometime.
I think it's just an
Part
awesome
two of this one.
Thank you very much. Here, here.
Something, you know, the trail elements, kind of stickers for you guys if anybody wants any.